Hi everyone, my name's Kathy Richards, and I just want to review a few things with you before you begin this week's assignment. Okay, so for this week's assignment, you're going to be completing a claim form using the information provided on the case study in Figure 6.9a of your textbook. Your patient will be Cameron Carl. If you have access to a printer, it may be much easier to just go ahead and print that form along with the blank claim form found in Figure 6.9b, as those are the two documents that you'll need to refer back to. So to do this, you're going to label a Word document with the block number and letter for each line that needs information filled in. If a line can be left blank, then you don't even need to include that on your answer sheet. Make sure you're entering the information exactly as it should appear. So you're not just entering a description of what needs added to that line, but you're entering the actual information. So for instance, if the form is asking you for the patient's name, then you're actually entering the patient's name as it would appear. So if it's wanting last name, first name, then you are going to enter Carl, Cameron. Be sure that you're paying attention to spelling, to those order of words, as that stuff will count as it would on an actual claim form. So if I were sending this as a bill and I entered Cameron Carl, when it's asking me for the patient's last name and then first name, most likely that claim would be rejected because it's not going to recognize the patient's name in that order. So pay special attention to your order of words, your spelling, all of those little details to make sure everything's exactly as it needs to be according to the instructions on the form.
Before you begin actually working on the case study that you need to complete for this week's assignment, I want to go through and review a sample that's provided in your textbook. So this is the case study found in Figure 6.6 in your textbook regarding the new patient, Ann Adams. And then on the next page in Figure 6.7, you will see the actual completed claim form. So I want to break this down for you block by block and review what information typically needs completed in the claim form, what information is left blank, how things need to be formatted, etc. Okay, if you have Figure 6.6 brought up or printed to refer back to, let's take a look at what information we need to transfer from this case study onto our claim form. So in block 1, it's asking us what this patient's primary insurance is. So we can see on the case study that her primary insurance is Aetna, which is a group health plan. So we have that box X'd. And then in block 1A, we have her insurance plan ID number entered. Notice the information that I have highlighted in blocks 2 and 4. This is giving us the correct order for how names need to be entered on a claim form. So we have to enter the last name, then a comma, then the first name, comma, and then the patient's middle initial if they had one. So in block 2, we have Adams, comma, Ann, and notice that all caps are being used as we complete our claim forms. In block 3, it's asking for her date of birth, and notice that the little lines are separating the month, day, and year, so there's no need to type in another dash or diagonal line. We're just typing the components in the little boxes as they show. So the month 04, day 12, year 1972, and then we have the F box X'd to indicate that she's a female. And in block 4, it's asking us what the insured's name is. So if you look back on the case study form, it says relationship to patient, self. So that means that Ann Adams is also the policyholder of the primary insurance plan. So it's sufficient in this case just to type the word same in all caps in block 4. Or we could also retype her name as Adams, Ann. So either or. Now, if you had, let's say, her husband as the policy holder, then this is where his information would be typed. So his last name, first name, middle initial. In block 5, it's asking us for the patient's address, And once again, we want to type this according to how the boxes are listed. So we have the street number and name on the first line, then the city, the state, the zip code, and the telephone number. And notice that the parentheses are already provided for the area code. In block 6, the self box should be X. This is actually an error on the completed claim form where that was omitted. So there should be an X in that self box to indicate again that the patient is also the policyholder for the primary insurance. And then in block 7, it's asking us for the insured's address. So once again, it's sufficient in this case just to type the word same on that first line, and then we can leave those next couple lines blank. Again, if there was a different insured, then we would type that person's address. Let's say it was a child as the patient and a parent maybe who didn't even live with the child as the primary insurance holder. Then that information would be typed here. Looking at the next portion of the claim form, I want to actually reverse the order that we talk about blocks 9 and 11 because I think it'll make a little bit more sense to you that way. So let's look at block 11 first. This is still related to the primary insurance plan, and they're asking us what the insured's policy group number is on the first line. So this will vary somewhat depending on the type of insurance, so please refer back to the block-by-block instructions provided in Chapter 5 for a little bit more specific information depending on the type of insurance you're dealing with. But generally speaking, if the insurance had a specific group number, this is the line where you would enter that information. In Medicare, for instance, they don't have a specific group, so you would just enter the word none. And in other cases, you may just leave this line blank. On the next line, it's asking us for the insured's date of birth and sex. So in Ann Adams' case, we've already identified that information earlier on the claim form, so there's no need to relist it here since she is also the policyholder. However, if we had someone else as the policyholder of the insurance, then this is where we would put their date of birth and sex. Line B is typically left blank. There are occasions where we would complete this with a claim number, such as for a workers' comp claim or a property claim, but generally speaking, we're going to leave this line blank. Line C is asking us for an insurance plan or program name. This is not talking about the insurance itself. So for Ann Adams, we would not enter the word Aetna here for that insurance. That information has already been provided in block 1. This is talking about a different plan or program name that may be identified on the insurance card. Then in line D of block 11, it's asking us, is there another health benefit plan? So in Ann Adams' case, she does not have a secondary or supplemental insurance policy, so we have the X in the no box. If she did have a secondary policy, then we would put an X in the yes box, and you can see the little notation to the side. It says, if yes, complete items 9, 9A, and 9D. And then that refers us back to block 9, and that is where we would enter the patient's secondary insurance information. So the insured's name in the same order, last name, first name, middle initial, their policy and group number, and then their insurance plan or program name on line D. In block 10, you can see I have something else highlighted here. This is asking us, is the patient's condition related to, and then it lists employment, auto accident, or other accident. A lot of people tend to look at this quickly and see employment, and they think that's asking, is the patient employed? And they put an X in the yes box. Remember, this is asking specifically, is their condition related to their employment, not whether or not they are employed. So for instance, if you put an X in the yes box, then this insurance claim may very well be denied because it would be assumed that this claim was covered under workers' comp. If you put an X in the yes box under auto accident, then it would be assumed that this claim would be covered under their auto insurance. So very important, make sure you read those instructions carefully. You can also see next to the auto accident boxes that there's a place listed, and that's where you would enter the 2 letters for the abbreviation of what state the auto accident occurred in. And then finally in blocks 12 and 13, this is asking us for the patient and insured signatures. So if you had those signatures on file with the office, then it's acceptable just to list the abbreviation SOF for signature on file. And then we're going to also list the date in block 12. Many of the blocks in this next section are also only completed under certain circumstances. So again, please refer back to the more detailed instructions provided in Chapter 5 and review that information. But generally speaking, Block 14 is completed typically for accidents such as a workers' comp claim or auto vehicle accident, where you want to list the date an injury occurred, or for a pregnant female and you're listing the date of the last menstrual period. Block 15, also just relating to specific information that you can see highlighted in your textbook. Block 16 is if a patient is unable to work due to their condition, then you would list the from and to dates that they have been off work. Block 17, you're going to list the name and number for a referring provider if one is listed. Block 18 is if the patient is hospitalized, then you would list the from and to dates of their hospitalization, or if they're still hospitalized at the time the claim is filed, then you would list NA for not applicable under the to date section. Block 20 is one that you do typically fill out. You're going to enter either the yes or no if an outside lab or provider is being used for any of the charges. So if no outside provider is indicated, then you're going to X the no box. If one was indicated, then you would list the charges related to those services. Block 21 of this next section identifies the patient's diagnosis. So in this case for Ann Adams, it was 784.0. Notice that only codes are used here. Nothing is ever written out. So either the ICD-9 or ICD-10 code would be entered. If the patient has more than one diagnosis, then we would enter one on each line. Block 22 is typically left blank. That's reserved for claims that are being resubmitted for some reason. Block 23 relates to prior authorizations. So if you needed to obtain a prior auth number for a particular procedure, then that would be entered there. Block 24 is divided into several different columns. So the first column is asking us for the dates of service. So in Ann Adams' case, she was seen for a visit on only one date. So that same date then would be entered in both the from and to columns. If this were an inpatient who maybe had the same service performed on multiple consecutive days, then you would enter the first date the service was performed in the from column and the last date that it was performed in the to column. And note also that our vertical lines are provided again between the month, day, and year, so we're only entering numbers, no need to enter dashes or diagonal lines between those components. Column B asks us for the place of service. Again, only codes are used. So for the sake of your assignments, we've already provided those for you in the assignment instructions, so you don't need to go online to look them up. So you can just plug that information in. Column C is reserved just for emergency services, so typically that will be left blank. Column D is asking us for the CPT or HCPCS codes for the procedures and services performed. So if we had multiple things that we were billing for, we would list one on each line. And then there's a space provided afterwards if we have modifiers that pertain to any of those. Column E is relating the services and procedures that were performed back to the diagnoses that are listed in Block 21. So in Ann Adams' case, obviously she only had one visit and she only had one diagnosis, so they have the number 1 entered. If a patient had multiple services or multiple diagnoses, then it would be important to identify which diagnosis justified each individual service or procedure being performed. So we would list the appropriate letter in Block 21, so A, B, C, etc., depending on what diagnosis pertained to each individual service. In column F, it's asking us for the charges of each service. So notice no dollar signs or decimal points are entered. We have the vertical line again separating those items, so we can just enter the dollar amounts. Column G is asking us for the days or units. So in this case, the visit was just performed once, so we have the number 1. In our previous example, if this were an inpatient and the service was performed on multiple days, then we would have a different number listed there. In column H, it's asking us, is the service related to the early and periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment? So depending on the state requirements, as far as those family planning services, sometimes we would enter either a Y for yes or N for no there. And then in column J, this is completed only if the provider rendering or supervising care is different than the one listed below on the claim form as the billing provider. Otherwise, that's left blank. Then for the last section of the claim form, Block 25 lists the physician's federal tax ID number and identifies whether it's their Social Security or their employer identification number. Block 26 asks us for the patient's account number, and this is the number assigned specifically by the practice or the provider, not their insurance number. Block 27 asks if the provider is accepting assignment. You can assume for any claims that you're completing in class that they are, and X the yes box. Block 28 wants the total charges that are being billed. So if there's multiple services or procedures that are listed above on the claim form, you want to total those and list that amount. Block 29 asks for the amount paid. So if nothing specific is noted on the case study form, then you can just enter zeros here for the amount that the patient has paid. Block 30 is reserved for specific use, so you can actually leave that blank as you go through and complete your claims. Block 31 is asking for the physician's name, credentials, and date. Block 32 is asking for the facility location. So if this were an individual provider who performed the services in his or her office, then you could relist their name and address and NPI. If services were performed at another location, such as a hospital, then you would want to list that information. And finally, in Block 33, it's asking for the billing provider information. So once again, the physician's name, credentials, address, phone number, and NPI. I appreciate you taking the time to view this and hope it was helpful. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to your instructor and they'll be happy to help you.